We are going to start our Tuesday, March 12th FinCom meeting, where we will be reviewing our subcommittee reports. But before we do that, we will do a roll call because we have a participant on the line. So George Hertz.
Yes.
Barb Delisle.
Here.
Ellen Rawlings.
Here.
Peter Lenz.
Here.
Cindy Buckley.
Here.
Jane, do we call you?
No.
Jane, no. Julie, do I call you? Howard Messing.
I'm here.
Great, thanks, Howard. Tom Gilgariff.
Here.
Mike Powers.
Here.
Mike O'Hara.
Here.
Chris Pareda.
Here.
Lauren Fitzpatrick.
Here.
Jim Ferraro.
Here.
And Julianne Bride as chair of FinCom. So before we get started, we will grant permission to Westwood Media to record this meeting. Would anyone else want to record the meeting? Okay, great. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance.
We've moved the flag, it's over
Oh,
here. You guys. Oh, good.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So the way that we'll go through this is first we'll do the municipal budget. Peter Lenz, as chair of the municipal subcommittee, will go first. Jen Perkins will be here shortly to do the school budget. And then Mike O'Hara and Barb, on behalf of the long-range planning, will give their report. So we'll have questions after each presenter. So with that, Pete, turn it over to you.
All right. Now, is there a mic up here? Is that people hearing me okay?
I can.
Can you hear me? You are okay?
Okay.
Yes, good.
Well, welcome everyone to the highly anticipated Finance and Warrant Commission municipal budget presentation. Glad to see some department heads here. I'd like to say thanks to Mike and all his department heads for being available for us. They really did a good job in making themselves available and answering any questions that we had. So in terms of the team, just want to, this is the agenda that we have, and this is the team. Really a very highly intelligent and committed, engaged team. We have Ellen Larkin-Rollins, Barb Delisle. Some of you may notice that Barb is not necessarily on a letterhead that says she's on the municipal subcommittee.
Because I'm not.
But she's not, but she is, because we drafted her. Because we had a little bit more responsibility this year with OPEB, and we had one less person, so we reached out for a relief pitcher, and thankful to Barb that she would say yes for that. Howard is here in spirit and voice. He's on the phone. So as far as Public Works, I will present Public Works, and Howard will jump in if need be. And Cindy's also here doing Culture and Recreation. And really, one of the things that I have to say before we go any further, I need to thank Jane O'Donnell, because when you think of what we have, is we have a very diverse group of probably 7 or 8 different department heads. We have all the schedules of the folks here, and Mike's schedule, and Jane had to coordinate. So it was really like herding all the cats, and Jane did a great job and everything for helping us.
You guys made it easy.
So I won't go over the subcommittee members here. I do want to review the process, and the process is very similar to what we did last year. Obviously, we're focusing on the budgets. We're meeting with all those groups that we mentioned and list here. We have certainly a focus on Westwood Station's impact of things, especially police and fire. We really take a close look at operational metrics, and we thank those department heads for providing us those metrics. They give us a much better understanding of things. We're looking to ensure that financial planning and controls are there. And we're reviewing capital plans. You'll notice that some folks will talk about in their individual presentations about capital, but I've also got a slide at the end about capital, because capital is pretty important this year for those who looked at the budget book, and it's pretty large, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. In terms of, I'm kind of in the accounting world, and so I'm very precise on things, and for those who might have brought their budget book from last time, you'll notice that some of these numbers are a little different. And that is because we sat with Pam, and there were some last minute changes to the accounting of the way some salaries were put together for the recreation department. So we've added those in here. So these are the most up-to-date numbers that we have. And you'll see the budget is roughly around 22 million, and it's roughly a 3.5% increase over last year. So nothing major out of the ordinary as far as the increase this year. The salaries at 73% of the total are essentially the same as what they were last year too. And if you look on the right side, you'll see in order of magnitude the size of the different organizations that make up the municipal budget. But those are pretty much the same as last year too. One thing I'll highlight on the bottom left is we're highlighting 1.3 million of the capital budget. That is specifically the municipal budget, but there is a lot more when you look at the other capital portion of the budget that relates to municipal projects. So in terms of salary and expenses, you'll notice that salaries are up a little bit more than expenses. The average is 3.5% for in total. The reason the salaries are up mostly is due to some accounting changes. And what has happened is primarily in DPW, what happened is they've gone in a different direction where they had custodial services in expenses, and they are now putting those, and they've actually hired salary and custodial people that show up in the salary section there. So that has impacted the change. We didn't impact FY19, so it's made salary look a little bit higher, but if you adjusted that out, salary would be just a normal percentage increase. In terms of what makes up the salary budget increase, we have a couple of items. First of all, a large share, 81%, relates to COLA and step increase. There's really nothing you can do about that. And then there's two different positions. One I mentioned regarding the custodial position, which is really not new. It's just shifting from expense to salary. And second is team librarian. And for anybody that spends any time in the library in the afternoon, you'll know that that's an important thing to have. In terms of expenses are only up about $165K. And I don't want to mislead you with some of those percentages there. When, just as an example, with the first item that says 49% increase in utilities, facilities, and maintenance, that does not mean that facilities, utilities, and maintenance went up 49% from last year. It means their increase made up 49% of 165K. So I don't want to mislead anybody with that. Someone walking away saying, oh my God, you see how much that increased. It did not. It's just those made up the lion's share of things. And you'll see on the bottom, the way this adds to 100% of the increase is we took money out of the custodial contract and put that into salaries. So hopefully that's not misleading. But really, in the end, it's just a normal increase. And here for the police department, and we'll let Ellen do that.
Excuse me. So for fiscal year,
No, she's just going to do it from there.
Just push that right over to you. Thanks.
all right, I'll try and project too. For fiscal year 20, the proposed budget is $4.3 million. That's a 4.3% increase from the prior year. That's a modest increase in the grand scheme of things. The number of overall staff will remain unchanged from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20. They are shifting one position. One of the dispatcher positions is going to be the new communications director, who will be a subject matter expert on all the tools that both police and fire use, like the radios, the software, 911, et cetera. Over the past year, they increased staff cultural, linguistic, racial, and gender diversity to better match our constituency, which I personally think is a wonderful achievement, and I laud the department for making strides in that area. And just, we wanted to call out as well that the 9-member dispatch staff, including the communications director, is incorporated in the police budget. They also field fire department and ambulance calls, so that's a more comprehensive position. The overtime forecast remains at $289,000, better matches the actual overtime expenses. That's the same figure that was requested last year. We still lag behind many comparable towns in the area. Most range between $300,000 to $500,000. We believe that $350,000 is probably an accurate expense forecast for the police department. And the operating costs forecasted to increase about 1.7%, which is about the same as the increase was last year. Slightly more, but not much. It's negligible. We also took a look at, the calls and the impact of University Station, and this is the most recent data. We got that in time for this report. Calls for service increased 18.75% after a 7.7% decrease the previous year. 911 calls decreased 4.3% after a 4.6% decrease in 2017. Police dispatches decreased 5.6% after a 12% decrease the prior year. Larceny theft crimes decreased 21.5% after a 4.4% decrease in 2017. Disturbances crimes decreased 11.5% after a 3.6% decrease the previous year. Citations issued increased 64% after a 35% decrease in 2017. Total arrests increased 27% after an 18% decrease in 2017. We still project that Phase 2 of University Station will most likely result in another increase in calls for service. And one thing that Chief Silva did note was that in general, not just at University, but townwide, mental health-related calls comprise a large portion of the overall total call. I see Chief Deckers is nodding as well, because those calls tend to take more time than other types of calls.
Julie, if we have questions, do you want us to ask them now in the stats? Or
We were going to hold them, George, if that's okay.
we do it at the end of each section?
Yeah. Yep, we can do that.
Next slide, please. We kind of checked in on how things are going with the new police headquarters. It sounds like overall things are going very well. The one lingering kind of issue that seems to come up is getting service when there's an HVAC system issue. Not in the sense of no one can do it, it just seems to take the techs more time to find the right person to solve the problem. So these new systems are very efficient, but they're also really complicated. So it tends to take a little longer to get the right person out for the job. As far as preparedness for threats to the community, the entire department had attended active shooter training. Every cruiser is now equipped with an active shooter kit, which was described as it's a particular type of helmet, a particular type of Kevlar vest, a particular type of firearm that are all kind of standard for an active shooter type situation, so that every cruiser has at least one of those. At-risk identification initiatives continue to include communication with hospitals, other police departments, mental health counselors, et cetera. We're also, the municipal building security study is still ongoing, and the results will be shared when they are ready, and that data will be used to make recommendations for enhanced security measures as appropriate. The key initiatives for the Westwood Police Department for 2020 are to continue to expand their coverage at our schools. The school resource officer is currently in place, and that's been very successful, and they're still actively pursuing adding a second school resource officer. And then as the demands for police service continue to grow, the Westwood Police Department will modulate its staffing to most efficiently meet our community's needs and continue to exercise fiscally responsible personnel management. For capital investment, this year they're looking to replace or rotate 4 vehicles, one of which will be a detective vehicle. And the usual set of equipment, safety equipment, like the Kevlar, the bulletproof vests, traffic safety security equipment, electronic control devices, tasers, and radio infrastructure. That is, that's my thing, yes.
Just on the statistics, on the impact of University Station, so all of these statistics relate to University Station except for the mental health calls, which are townwide?
My understanding is they don't all result to, they're not all a result of University Station, but University still continues to kind of be the largest pull on services. That's a question I can certainly take back to Chief Silva.
I just, in looking at the stats where it says calls for service increased about 19%, then it goes through a whole bunch of decreases, and when I see the increases,
Citations.
citations and arrests, I don't quite understand. Part of it doesn't make sense. If the 911 calls are decreasing, which is the way people are going to call, I just don't understand the statistics.
Well, can we look at fire? Because I would think, while not identical, I think a lot of fire and police, we should see some similarities. And I think the question is around University Station and how many resources does that continue? I think we're,
I
what,
don't have them broken down the
Yeah,
same
I
way.
agree.
We budgeted, but I think we budgeted the staff for University Station. And
I think it's been used
Right,
in
that's okay.
past
I'm
years.
just saying that these statistics don't line up for me when
Yeah,
I look at it.
I agree.
There's some inconsistencies here. And then the mental health calls, is that town-wide?
That was what Chief Silva
So my
said,
question
yes.
would be, of the calls that the department gets, what percentage of the mental health calls? It's not,
I know last year we struggled to get some data from the chief.
We didn't have, Ellen and I were talking about this at the start of the meeting. We didn't have the information from the chief when we had our meeting, so we got it after the fact. So because we got it after the fact, I think what we'll have to do is maybe ask him a few questions there.
Yeah, because I noticed the same trends as I was reviewing the data and putting the presentation together. So that's certainly a question I can take back to.
it was more of a curiosity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ellen, in prior years, the chief was able to break out the University Station data so that you could see the direct impact and the spike in calls that was directly due to University Station, which was helpful, because then it really sort of illustrated the impact.
But the story doesn't fully kind of.
Because it's interesting that you would think that after the spike in 15 and 16 in calls for service, you'd see that leveling in 17, but then it's interesting that there's a fairly significant drop, further drop, in some of these types of calls and some of these crimes, so it's interesting.
Do you want to, oh, go ahead, Jim.
Sorry, do you have specific numbers to go with these percentages? How many?
Yes. I could dig that out, but yes, he gave us a breakdown. It was a spreadsheet with numbers. So like, for example, even though arrests increased 27%, total arrests was still under 400. If that, it was a jump from the previous year, but it wasn't like we had 5,000 arrests last year.
And we could publish the exact numbers that he provided us.
That would be helpful.
I've got that.
But I guess I'd just add that it's described as modest, but 4.3 is a little bit higher than modest to me, based on what we've seen in the past of 2 or 3% for budget increases. Did you want to do fire?
And I have the advantage of having the chief here so we can ask him questions. Thank you very much to Chief Deckers for meeting with us and answering every question we could think of and having lots of data. They're looking for an additional 2 firefighters this year to increase their staff. If you recall, we've been concentrating on how many staff they have per group. They are aiming for 10 per group. They've got 4 groups. So they're trying to aim for 10 groups. This kind of brings them up to their 10 per group level, which was facilitated through University Station and needed for that, but that's been their goal. So if there's 3 ambulance calls in town, they can answer 3 ambulance calls at once for the most part during peak hours. Peak hours that they're running a staffing program of peak level staffing from 8 to 3. And that allows them to send out more than 1 ambulance, which has an impact, positive impact, because of course we do get paid for the ambulance revenues. The one issue that we've got on paper, it looks wonderful, but the problem has been hiring. Just because we've got the numbers approved, we've not hired. And hires can take 6 to 10 months to be fully on board. And, they can go through the whole process and make offers and not necessarily. They just recently hired 4 new firefighters, and their first woman, by the way. But they still have to go through the academy and all, so they're not fully on board. So even when they hire these, it'll probably be well into the next year that they actually are on board. So they still actually need to hire from their current staffing. They are also looking to making some changes on staffing, which is good because it also does create a little bit more flexibility and a little more advancement opportunity within the department. An EMS coordinator, which had previously been done through two people doing it under stipend. And the coordinator will be able to tailor train programs, and it means they won't be outsourcing training. So as a result, while their budget is up 1.9%, their non-salary budget went down by $15,000. So they're going to be doing that internally. They also are adding a fire prevention training officer for, part of this was as a result of an ISO review that they had, so they're required to add this training and internally. And then also on the fire prevention side, they're going to be upgrading and standardizing the inspection program. Mostly, I feel this is something that's really been generated out of University Station, because you've got you've got a hotel now and you've got apartments and all. You can't just pop in and take care of it. Now you have to have certain staffing doing that inspection. So that's definitely a result of University Station. They also have, you mentioned the communications director, and they're going to be working very closely with that. That's a very positive thing, and it's while it isn't within their location, they feel that that's a very positive thing. On University Station as a whole, they've only had a marginal increase of about 4% of calls down there. Was that for 2020 to date, or was that FY19?
That was FY 18.
18, okay.
18 is the data set that we pulled for that.
Okay. And then with Brigham and Women's opening, they've only had about 4 calls, so that's not really had a big impact. The calls are going to, Bridges is the principal location of where the calls are going. So, and that impacts, when they go down there, the police also always go down there as well.
But police are at 19% almost for increase in calls, and fire's at 4%. That's a pretty big delta.
And was
I'm
fire.
not asking you to
yeah.
explain it, I'm just saying you would think they would be more closer. So to your-
I think the fire is gonna be medical, and primarily medical. You're not gonna
Right.
have, I don't think you have a structure, you may have an occasional structure, but police,
The
have
fi-
been
the
theft, shoplifting.
The fire do go when the ambulance goes, usually there's a
Yeah, But I
fire.
would assume there are a lot more
as well.
police calls, at least with the target and shoplifting and incidents and traffic violations and stuff like that. Julie, I'm not surprised at the differential.
Yeah, okay.
They estimate with the condos, there'll probably only be about 12 calls a year for the condos, based on what happens usually with condos. But they do expect when Brigham and Women's opens their urgent care within their facility, that will go up to, 15, 20 calls a year. So there's not a huge impact going forward, but except for the inspections and that type of work as well. They are working on various initiatives over the coming year. They're working on fire prevention. That's kind of the big, the push, as opposed to just putting out fires. It's fire prevention. So they're working with the GIS technology and working on hazard mitigation in key locations, starting with the schools. They are increasing fire safety with additional equipment. They're continuing the hiring process and trying to increase diversity. They have to meet state regulations as far as number of training hours. They're going to be working on more inspections. We asked about how the Adopt a Hydrant program was going, and at that point, they only had 28, but we haven't had, that have been adopted. We haven't had a big round of snow, except for we had that last snow. So, it probably out of sight, out of mind for people, because it wasn't an issue, so they'll continue to work on that. Let's see. The townwide security assessment is also a big issue. That's kind of the elephant in the room, because nobody knows what it's going to entail. And there could be quite a bit that's coming for that. They have done certain things, like they'll be purchasing body armor for all the ambulances. There's going to have to be more training. And a lot of what the fire department will be doing is more on a regional basis. If there was an active shooter or something, it would definitely be, working within our mutual aid area. Let's see. Capital is, the capital budget is a lot higher, and it's in 2 locations in the budget, which I guess we'll probably look at the summary later. But the 2 things that are probably the most important, because they're things that we haven't discussed, some of them are just continuing lease payments, replacement of the deputy's vehicle, and they're doing a radio upgrade and replacement. Those are kind of the normal things. They have something called the swap body multipurpose vehicle, which sounds kind of odd. It's basically they're trading in 2 of their 30-year-old squad trucks and purchasing a new truck that is, it's got a body that has, it makes me think of Transformers or something, that has changeable tops on them. And it kind of like on the back, I don't know, it almost looks like some sort of hydraulic thing, like a tow truck or something, but you can put different things on it. One of them is a brush truck if they're out fighting wildfires out in brush areas. There's another one that will be called a cascading, what is it called? A cascade filling system that will fill firefighters' air tanks on site. And they can change this depending on, and they'll be storing the tops behind the station, and they can change them in whenever they need them. So it's a really cost-effective way to basically get 4 new trucks. The other issue, and this is, I think, a longer-term issue, is the fire station, the number 1 fire station. Their bay floor has been deteriorating over the last few years. The trucks are getting heavier, there's a lot more use, and they've already had some work done, but it's only lasted for about 3 years. So they have to go in and do some more work to shore it up. They have to work on some drainage on the top, because the water's been settling on and deteriorating the cement. And that's imperative. That's why there's a $250,000 capital charge for that. They're going to be making some changes within converting some space in the basement to offices, removing mold, repairing the air conditioning equipment. But this is only going to take care of matters for about 5 years. It's also taking care of a further study on the whole building. That's not going to take care of the whole problem. It's just putting off the problem. I think there's another 150 anticipated for next year. So we're looking at now at 500,000, but that won't be the last of what we're going to see on that. So anyway, lots and lots of statistics, so if you want anything.
So
George
just,
wants it.
given that last issue you raised, isn't it it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when?
Oh, absolutely.
So I guess I'm maybe on the long-range financial capital plan, I'm curious in terms of where this thing is evolving. I mean, if we're gonna spend $250,000 every year, and I don't know if any of you have been in that basement, but I have, and there's structural steel beams supporting that main floor, so I'm not sure how long we can wait for this.
Absolutely, I mean, that was.
Where is it, Mike, where is it on the priority list for the town?
One of the top priorities in the municipal list.
Any thoughts in terms of when it would be addressed?
We haven't given a date as to when we would address it.
Part of it is they're looking at this report. You're waiting for this report, that they know that this other work has to be done, so they're having a
I'm
further
not trying to
report.
be a gadfly here, but just going into that building, it doesn't take long to figure out that this main fire station is in dire need of being replaced. And in my opinion, the longer we wait, the more risk we run here. And the fact that you're buying brand-new equipment and storing it behind the fire station doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy either. You know, it took a long time to address Islington, and I think the town did a fabulous job, and what, we spent $10 or $11 million. Needham just is spending, and their fire department's almost the same size of ours, they're spending $65 million to redo their main fire station in town, and they have a smaller substation in the Heights. And I think we probably actually have better equipment than they do, but I don't think you can let this sit here. I've been sort of waving this flag. We fought for staffing for a long time. I think we've solved that. But I think we're really, as a town, and I'm not going to be popular with some selectmen for saying this, I think we have to address this issue.
Long-range planning, the committee, not long-range planning that Mike's addressing now, but as a committee, we toured all the facilities when we first were organized and, you know, saw that fire station. And I think it was about 15 years ago we started.
Right.
And it was needed then, but the other one was worse, so. But yes,
Yeah,
it's
but
definitely, it's on the radar.
You look at the functional
Yeah.
change of the Islington station, what it was before, and what quality of equipment we have, facility we have now. And I'm just a real advocate for this. I think we really, as a town, I think we're waiting too long. Just to plan it and do it will take 2 years, and I think we've got to bite
Let's
the
talk
bullet.
about it with capital, George,
Okay.
just so we can get through the
Well, the only
operating.
reason I raised
but
it was
No,
I
I
was
think it's a
so
good
raised.
point, but let's have it in context of the other
I
things
just-
that probably will be
I will
competing
lower
right
my flag right now.
Well,
Good job.
I put it on there because I wanted the flag up there a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Because that's.
Thank you.
um,
Any other questions for Bob? Okay, so we'll move on to DPW.
Thanks, and we will talk about, as I said, we will talk about capital at the end. so
Yeah,
to
that
put it
sounds
in
good.
perspective. In terms of DPW and sewer, they did a very steady job this year, performing their own statement of work, and then on top of that, did these accomplishments. I won't list all these accomplishments. A few that really I think need highlighting is the Complete Streets project, which is really going to be a great project for Westwood, and they really kicked that off this year. Anyone that does any commuting time in the Clapboard Tree, Washington Street area, that's really helped getting that left signal and the lines aren't as long as they used to be. Todd's group has done a lot of work related to stormwater compliance to really kind of get ahead of that program and not have a bow wave that hits us as a town with a huge amount of expense in later years. So he's been very proactive in that. I think if Tom Philbin were here, he could talk for an hour and a half on energy savings improvements. He's done a great job there. One of the things that really doesn't show up when I talked before about some of the budget increases is the fact that because we've got larger buildings now, when you think of Fire Station 2 is bigger, and you think the police station is bigger, we're spending more on utilities, but it doesn't mean that we're not doing a lot to save energy. We just have larger footprints. And I really think that's something that we need to consider as we think about other buildings that we put on in town. It's my internal Peter Kane talking here, for those who remember Peter. So, and the other thing that Mike has talked before about is recycling. So there's got to be more on educating folks on recycling, because the market has changed in recycling and it's much more expensive for us to recycle now. So we really, and Todd and his group and others will be doing more to educate townspeople and school children on recycling. In terms of the fiscal budget, you see some numbers here. Really, I think focus on the 3.9%. The salary budget has increased that number because the additional positions related to custodial. If not for that, that increase would be much smaller. That would be closer to 3%. One point I'd like to make is the snow and ice removal. Though this year has been, we haven't seen a huge amount of snowfall, we've seen a lot of different events through the year, and it's really the events that cost a fair amount of money. So that's something that we'll have to wait to see if additional funding is going to be needed later in the year. There's no town engineer, but I think that's something that Todd is working through very well, and I think with the consulting firm, they are getting full value for the dollars that they spend associated with the town engineer.
And in terms of next year, I think a lot of next year will depend upon the bond article passing. To the extent it does, you'll see those top 4 projects being put into full effect. To the extent it's not, I think Todd's group will certainly do a lot of miscellaneous paving projects and patching. I think, our view on this, not to get ahead of the vote, but our view on this is that's something that, if it does pass, we'll actually be saving money in the long term doing that. I mentioned going down to the bottom, the ongoing recycling. I think that's very important as costs are going up to us. And Todd's group with Tom are going to do a lot, continue to do a lot for energy savings improvement. And as I mentioned before, Todd's group is really staying ahead of the stormwater compliance. So that's really a good thing for the town. So we won't have a huge blip in costs in later years. So community and economic development, this was my first year actually interviewing those folks, and I was really surprised and impressed by the job that they do. When you look at their budget being $1.15 million, it's actually a relatively small percent of the overall municipal budget. But when you see the things that they're involved in, the Islington Center revitalization and University Station, other things like that, and obviously affordable housing and things like that, it's a very important group, and they've got a large footprint for a very small budget. I think really, if I was to focus on anything regarding this slide, I'd focus on the continued areas of focus, because I think this year is going to be a very important year for this department and also for the town as they work, along with Mike and others, to try to alleviate the 10% affordable housing and not have 40B issues in the town. Also, the Islington Center revitalization projects is going to be starting in full swing, so that'll be important to get through the year. And then the residential project that we've talked about before, related to the Westwood Lodge, is very important, and so far they're doing a good job working with the developer in preserving the character of Westwood in that. More important things regarding the split tax rate. We've heard last meeting that we had about the potential impact associated with a large development, office development, University Station, and that will really help that. But really important group for a very small amount of money.
Julie, just one quick question on that. Mike, where are we on with the passage of Islington project? Where are we on the 40B right now?
Well, we estimated it would be somewhere around 20, a little over London. There isn't been redevelopment identified or brought in with the one unit added to the existing rental houses. So I got that number up as well. So we went from 2 units that were affordable there to 12 units now. So it's an increase of 10. So this halfway to what we think the need is. There's a project, Westwood Lodge, Hospital.
Okay.
That property is being considered today, which will add a couple more in addition to the 10 that will go toward counting toward the units they're adding to it. And then we get another conversation going on about a group home down the street. So we're making progress.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We got about a year and a half.
I mean, that is a big issue for us, thank you.
So Pete, why don't you finish up before, we'll hold all the questions so Pete can finish his.
Okay, Cindy is next, just to do library rec, and then I will finish up from there.
Sure. I will be quick. So first, we spoke with the library. Tricia, thank you. The increase for the library budget will be 3.6%, so $1.43 million this year. And the library, I think, continues to be the center point of the community. They are doing a phenomenal job making sure that all age groups are included and all of the programs are growing. One of the reasons for well, there's several reasons for the increase, which is also I consider to be modest. The continuation in order to maintain accreditation in the Minuteman Library Network, they need to spend money on books, audiovisual pieces, and periodicals, and that will be 15.5% of the budget, right? Did I got that right? Okay, good. And as a result of all of the programs that are being more well attended, the printing costs for the library, you see 100% increase. To support that, it goes to flyers that they hand out after the sessions and book lists and those types of things. So while the library is being more well utilized, those instances are increasing. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, good. Because I don't sound like I'm making sense to myself. Then we moved on to recreation. Nicole, thank you. The budget for recreation department is slightly down next year, 723. A few things that are driving the budget for next year, or that will have an increase on the budget. They want to hire an additional full-time person for the aquatics center to support the 113 hours that the pool is actually open, which I didn't realize the pool was open that many hours during the week. And they had been covering that with a patchwork of part-time folks and, 2 full-time folks that had to cover the hours, right? And the minimum wage went up from $11 an hour to $12 an hour, which will largely be offset by the increase in program fees, but we will see that increase as well. The largest thing I think to talk about within the recreation budget is the $840,000 for the capital improvement request. That is anticipation, $725,000 of it is in anticipation of the temporary field closures due to the potential school building project and the Westwood Lodge redevelopment. So they want to put lights on the fields at Thurston to increase the amount of recreation time that the outdoor sports teams have to use those fields, because we're going to be losing a large chunk of what is available. So they need to provide an alternative, and the lighting on the fields at Thurston will do that. And then there's some others that are outlined here as well. So that's all I have, if anyone has any questions.
I'm sorry.
Did I do that?
No, I did that. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I moved my paper.
The salaries that are now accounted for the general fund, how are they accounted for?
Previously. So, so previously, the salaries came out of the revolving fund, and so they weren't on the general fund ledger.
And why would we make that change?
The state is requiring the recreation department to make that change.
But it's, that transfers once a year, so is it a net zero? It pays for itself?
Yep, out of the revolving fund. So it will still pay for itself out of the revolving fund. It's just that it has to be shown on the general fund first, and then there'll be a once-a-year transfer from the revolving fund, which is where the fees, for the programming fees sit, right? So, okay. You're welcome.
Okay, good. So let me take this back.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Wow. Okay.
It wasn't me this time. Nope. Nope.
So really, in the interest of time, I won't spend much time on general government. This really, as I kind of talked about last year, really is kind of the backbone. Really a lot of solid departments here that run a lot of very important things in the town. When you think of Mike and Pam and Dottie and some of the other functions that are done there, it's great functions, very important. A lot of what they are doing, as you see in the service plan, are things that are important to the town. In terms of fixed costs, I will point out that we normally put fixed costs here. These costs that you see are the fixed costs of the entire town, not just the municipal departments. The municipal departments make up about 45% of those fixed costs. There's a relatively modest $4.1K careful in using that term now, but the 4.1% increase in fixed costs this year, so not really that bad, all things considered. OPEB. OPEB was added to our kind of statement of work this year. And for those of you who don't know, OPEB is other post-employment benefits. Those are, you just think of the healthcare coverage for retirees. Now, why is it so important? It's so important because when you think of some other towns and you hear of headlines where there's a lot of towns out there that all they do is they look at what their bills are for the year and what their cost is for the year, and that's what they fund. They don't worry about this impending doom behind them, which is the accrual of all the benefits for the employees that are going to be coming onto the plan soon. Westwood is doing this differently. They're doing a good job. They've got a plan that is putting roughly $1.4 million every year, and it's increasing slightly every year, and it's going to go to 2044 at this point in time. At that point in time, we'll be fully funded. There will be no unfunded liability, which will be a great thing. It's something that started relatively just soon, I think it was about 8 years ago. So they've made great progress so far in that. But still, the unfunded liability is $39 million, so it's nothing to sneeze at. But there is a plan, and they are working towards the plan. As I said, the unfunded liability is 39.1. That OPEB trust now has $8.3 million in it, so it's nothing to sneeze at as far as the progress that's been made since we started making large contributions to that. This year it would be $1.44 million, and as I said, it's 2044. That's really the goal. Just keep putting more money in. It's just like a savings plan. But the town will be so happy at the end when we're done with this, because we won't have this large unfunded liability that all these other towns and communities will have. We won't have to worry about that, and the employees in the town won't have to worry about it too. They'll know they'll get their retirement benefits. So very important, but a lot of good work is being done here. Now, I mentioned before that we wanted to talk about capital. So the municipal capital article will be $1.32 million. I just point out that was last year $867K roughly. Addition to that, and we've talked about some of these projects, there are outside the municipal article, there's the other capital article, that will have roughly 2.1 million of items exclusive of the middle school HVAC that really relate more to municipal than anything else. And then we've talked before about the road project article, which actually right now is proposed to be outside as a debt exemption, outside of Prop 2.5. So when you add those up, there's a significant amount of capital that has showed up. Now, we've highlighted a few of these large ones. Some of those have been talked about already. I really won't go into those. What we're really trying to do in our mission here is just to educate both the folks that are out there in the audience and the people in the committee. One of the budget booklets that we received details this that Pam has given us, and so I would recommend that you look at that before we have the next meeting and we talk about this and vote on it. We asked a lot of questions regarding capital, and we've got a lot of great responses, and there's nothing in there that isn't a need. We're not saying that. This is no way, when we bring up all this, there's no way are we questioning any individual capital item. Really what we're bringing up is just to make an observation about the totality of the budget and how much it is, and it's a large increase from the prior year. So I think we have to keep that in mind as we get ready for our votes.
Can we ask some questions about this?
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. Pam will be here on the 25th, the night of the 25th, to talk about the financing of the capital articles. Go ahead, George.
So my understanding is the road project article, which from my perspective makes a lot of sense, that's going to require a special town meeting vote, correct?
Yes.
What is the source of funding for the 2099? In other words, how are we funding those?
There's free cash, and there's also some other funding of like the meals tax revenue. So if you look at that budget book, and we have that here, I think. We could pull that out.
It'll be discussed a lot in Mike's
Yeah.
presentation.
But it's in the book that you have, George.
Well,
And
from my
it's,
observation, we're sort of depleting those reserves, correct?
yes.
Right, and Pam gave some headlines on that at a January, February meeting. I don't have my notes
I
with
guess
me,
the
but.
concern I have, there's two concerns I have. One is the fact that we are depleting these reserves significantly, which I'm not sure I'm comfortable with. And the second one is, I'm not sure I understand all these items and what the priority is.
So why don't we talk about it under Mike's, because I think
Okay.
he has that. I think your sentiments are understood by a lot of us, and we're trying to get clarity. So Mike and Barb, I think, have some due
But I just want to make
diligence.
sure we weren't
Yeah,
passing over.
no,
Okay,
yeah.
All right.
It's kind of duplicative because it hits
That's
both
right. All right.
areas,
No,
but.
I'm sorry. I didn't
Yeah.
mean to-
Yeah,
No,
we
they're
didn't
good
want to step
points.
on anyone's toes, we just wanted to make sure everyone,
Yep.
we noticed it, we wanted to make sure everyone was aware.
Peter, what's the Carvey Street retaining wall?
There's a retaining wall behind the building, and Todd could say it better than me, but there's a retaining wall that is in need of replacement or significant repair. And so it's a retaining wall, so you'd worry about what would happen if that retaining wall would give way and the hill would come down. So Todd, I would invite you to say any more.
Pretty much it in a nutshell. It was erected by one of our front-end loader operators years and years ago, and structurally is not sound enough to maintain what it's holding right now. This leaning is silting, and the entire embankment is in jeopardy of collapsing on the Carvey Street building.
That's not good.
So, I'll leave it at that.
So any other questions on the municipal budget? If not, we'll shift to school. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'll echo George's concerns. Fire Station 1 renovation, that's not renovation, that's maintenance. And Fire Station 1 renovation needs to be moved from any long-range discussion to a right-now discussion. This is an acute problem. It's not something we should be looking at long-range.
Anyone else? Thanks. Great job, everyone. That was really helpful.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Whatever you want to do, doesn't matter.
You want the clicker? Yeah. just gonna-
I wish I understood half the numbers.
A lot of nice work.
Who's up next? Patricia. School. Patricia. Thank you, Peter, for not making us stand.
Yes, I appreciate that.
No pressure, but they just took all your time.
I know, my problem is like we finally figured
I
it
blame
out,
Tom.
and I couldn't.
No,
then
It's only 8 as far as I know right now.
So like I sent,
Right.
I sent
Daylight
my,
savings.
my, right up, I sent that in the body
You
of my
think?
email.
Rain Man comes in and does this at the beginning of
Yeah, I
every
have a
meeting.
Mac too.
Yeah,
Can't screw it up.
yeah, the keynote does not really, I'll
Oh, yeah.
send it, it's
We
like,
go
it's
check.
like,
Yeah, it's,
so
Okay.
I go to church and I type it there.
School budget.
Oh,
Okay?
excuse me,
Okay.
oh yeah. It's the cough that won't go away.
yes. You ready, Barb?
So we're gonna just talk quickly about the school budget. I first wanna thank Diane McCarthy, who's not here tonight, for all the work that she did putting a lot of this together, and Mike Powers for being part of our group and giving us a lot of good leadership and direction as well. So that's our group, and I just wanted to quick go over the process of the department submission. It went through school committee with unanimous acceptance. We met with Emily after she had presented here. We asked all of our questions. Heath Petracca was there, as well as Abby Hanscom and Allison, and came forward with all the answers that we discussed, and it was a great conversation. And so now we're here tonight with our subcommittee presentation. I guess I first want to say that we all sort of unanimously felt between the three of us that the school department is really focused on making use of their dollars in support of the goals that they have. And so I wanted to start with highlighting what the district improvement goals are. And as you guys all know, Westwood is committed to this idea of continuous improvement, but the line items and the money where they've allocated money to, especially where it was moved around from last year, is really around curriculum instruction and professional development. So even though sometimes the cost increases aren't there from a percentage perspective, they've done a really good job managing the money that they have and trying to make it work in order to
meet the curriculum objectives that they have. And you can see some of the pieces underneath here that they're talking to, that they're going to utilize the money for. And I guess the other thing that we had a lot of conversation around is this idea too of being committed to the students and responding to what they need. So students today need something, quite a bit different than students 10 years ago, and the school department is really focused on the students of today and what they need, and you'll see that as you go forward within the budget. So just a quick highlight, kind of an executive summary piece on the top. First of all, the school budget's not really that complicated. 86%, nearly 90% of it is salaries, because it's a high impact, high touch environment. So the budget's really addressing, a lot of what it's addressing is related to salary. They did a good job of looking at enrollment trends, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but these enrollment trends have had them reallocate some of their teaching resources, and so that also impacted the budget as well. We did talk about union negotiations are going on. Emily and Heath are working on that. The 3-year contract that's coming, it's not included completely. It's what their expectation will be, so there's a little bit of work there, but I think they have it under control. So really what I can show you on the highlights up here are some of the changes that are there. So you can see that the total salary budget in here has gone up only 3.7%. So I find that to be pretty remarkable given the quality of the education that the children in the public schools are getting. And I really wanted to commend Emily and her group for being very respectful of the money and the town is providing. In addition to that, we've done a good job in lowering the utility bill, and a lot of that has to do with solar projects and also with some of Heath's cost-saving energy issues or energy programs that he's done across the system. And so overall, what you have in here is a 3.4% total budget increase from the previous year, up only $1.5 million. And again, as you look at that, of the 1.6 million, almost 1.46 plus of it is salary related. You can look at the enrollment, like I had talked about before, enrollment and what's happening within our schools. There's a lot of discussion about the bubble and the enrollment bubble. Actually, if you look at the numbers, it's overall pretty stable enrollment that's happening within our system. So even if you go back 10 years ago, it's fairly similar to the numbers that we have now. But what they're looking at and what they're tracking is the distribution that's happening across the grades. And so they're being very careful about how many teachers they're putting within which classrooms. Sometimes there's 3 classrooms needed per grade in some of these schools, and sometimes it's down to even as much as half of a classroom is needed. So going forward, I think what's important to understand is that the middle school enrollment is declining and the high school enrollment is increasing, and the projections going out are that the elementary school is going to come back again. So we really have to keep all of these dynamics in our minds as we go forward looking at all the different projects that are coming up, especially the large school that we're talking about building that we're in the feasibility study for. For those of you interested in details, you can see here the overall personnel recommendations. We're talking about decreasing some of the elementary school class sections due to enrollment issues, and incrementally across some of the departments at Thurston. Again, I want to say, like, we laughed and talked about it, about, well, 1.4, 1.6% of a person, like, what is that? And that's I think one of the great things that they've done is really realize what it is that's taking people time within the school systems, and then allocating that and calling that out as a percentage of a person's time. So instead of hiring a whole person, they're actually using that money to supplement a person who's already hired, maybe giving them some additional responsibilities, and maybe increasing their salary or whatever. So again, just really careful utilization of the resources that we're getting into the schools as well. Again, just a little bit more details about that reallocation of staffing. So we talked about on the teaching side, sort of where exactly we're doing stuff, we're doing things. So, and again, if you can see, this is around curriculum, around instructional coaching, and then also around civics education and the increase in meeting of the new state requirements that are there. Also, I think is to look and add out is the pre-K piece and the social emotional learning coordinators. It's been a commitment from the school committee chair and the school committee, as well as Abby and Emily, to, again, meet the students where they are. And so having this additional person that's in there, it's much more cost-effective than going and using outside resources and outside personnel. So this is the detail to what we just talked about. This is the increases in both teaching and sort of non-teaching or other staff salaries. Again, half a person, 1.9 people. It's just it's a very creative way to try to get us a lot more bang for our buck. So 3.4%, very economical use of our resources. Very proud of the budget the school department committed to us. One of the biggest pieces that's always unknown is the special education budget. And I think if Abby was here, she would say that she was really pleased to be able to put almost a level budget forward. We've had some reduction of dropping off and of larger expenses that happen within the budget, and so they were able to kind of move some things around. So there's really a very low number of people in out-of-district placement, and that's a lot of the reasons why we have really such a robust budget, is because we've reduced the need for out-of-district placements by having the resources we have in the school system and the way that they've been deployed. So there are some of the students that are dropping off, but we're continuing to include efforts to increase the capacity, so fewer and fewer students are being sent out of district for their education within the public schools. And so as you can see, the residential tuition is going up $12,000 over the previous year, which is, clearly very low. And some of the pieces that have dropped, the day tuition and the out-of-district transportation has dropped, while some of the others have come up a little bit. So again, really good balance of the budget, a really good use of the special ed budget. Really, really, I think, responsive to what the kids within Westwood need. So see how fast I am, Joel?
That's great. I love it. That makes me really happy.
Well done.
School capital budget, this was one of the biggest conversations that we had. There are some, pretty significant needs within the school department, within the buildings that we have, which is why we're having the discussions about the new school that we're in the feasibility, which we'll talk about in just a second. So we can't not do some of those things. So a lot of those things are embedded in the budget as well. The HVAC repair that's in there. And then there's a whole bunch of projects, and if Pete was here, he could roll out his big ledger of every single project that's included in his 40, to replacing every sort of different kind of thing within the school that's falling apart. So also the technology budget went down, which is actually a great but surprising thing. We've reached our one-to-one capacity. So we're not actually actively adding new classes of laptops. We're just sort of getting into this maintenance cycle now. So that actually is it's a great accomplishment that over the period of time that's happened. And Steve Boulette's been really instrumental in leading that effort under Emily and John. So the last piece of the budget dollar amount that we discussed was this budget by category. So what you can see in here is, again, some of the modest increases that they're asking for. It's really, a lot of it is around repair and maintenance. And then again, some of it, you can see the technology budget going down. You can see the repair and maintenance budget coming up. And again, roofing, things like that. So not things that we can put off, again, kind of similar to the fire department conversation. There are roofing needs at the schools, and kids cannot get wet while they're learning, so that would be very bad. Okay, last quick piece, and then we can take questions if you want, Mike and I. This is the school building project update. Now, you've probably gotten a lot more information and a lot better information from Emily as she sent this stuff out along the Westwood Wire and out to the school, to the community actually as well, but I'll just give you a quick update here. Very, very high view. We're in the feasibility study, so we're at the point now where we're actually looking at actual projects and they're being evaluated. So this is a very detailed section of the project, so it's been very interesting. One of the things I would call out about this is that, again, looking at these enrollment projections, like I had talked about earlier, MSBA and the school department have both done enrollment projections, and they're sort of right now comparing those together so that we can understand what the real need will be going for the future. So it's nice to have our own information as well as whatever we're getting from MSBA, and Heath and the school department have been responsible for getting us some of that information. And there's a real commitment within the budget, within this section of the feasibility study, to hold these community forums. So the result of which all of this work will be that we will get what we really need. So, and that's the hope, and that's the driving force behind it. Just the current timeline, very quickly, you know, we're looking at what's gonna happen, the feasibility study. The idea is they would begin construction potentially sometime in 2021 with a completed project happening a couple of years later. Obviously, timeframe subject to all sorts of outside influences, but at least in a general sense, that's what we're looking at, sort of a 2 to 3 year plan going out forward. There is no money in the budget this year to facilitate the building of a school. So just to be clear that is not in the 3% that we're talking about, because we're not gonna be doing any building or anything beginning construction until at least 2021. So that will be coming next year, or potentially depending on whether things slip farther out. What did I leave out?
Nothing, great job. I just want to echo what you said about the commitment demonstrated by Emily and her group. What I was most impressed by is how they were able to maintain their short-term vision while incorporating the long-term vision, which is certainly necessary as we move forward in the next few years. To commit to the best school system they can be, and that's what we heard over and over. So I just want to applaud them for their great focus today, and they continue doing what you do. Questions?
Go ahead, Chris.
Maybe I misunderstood. The laptop program, now they recycle laptops from seniors to freshmen?
So if they replace them as they're needed now, because now we don't have to add any additional whole new classes of doing the one-to-one program. So that it's been rolled out as far as it's gonna go. I think it's 3rd grade, right?
We're one-to-one now in grades 3 to 12. So up until this point, we've been adding a grade every year, but now we've completed that process. So at this point, we're just in a maintenance.
Okay, I get it. I was thinking of something different, right? Thank you.
It's okay, no problem.
Every 3rd grader has a laptop?
Yeah.
They don't
Chrome-
bring it
a
home.
Chrome.
bring them home.
They
They
don't
take
bring
it home?
Thank God.
I've got 2 questions. One, on University Station, if you went over any of those numbers, and have there been changes? And I know that, you know, they added the vans to provide, I know I've heard that that's working out very well. But I was just wondering what the numbers were like now as people move on. You know, there's turnover, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, well, we did talk about it. Emily's here to give some more detail if you want to. We did talk about it and the idea that initially those kids were all going into one school, one elementary school, and that with the vans that they've moved to dispersing kids into students into different elementary schools. And I think it has worked pretty well. And there's a good commitment on the school department side to like keep families together, keep kids in grades together, so that they have, you know, so that there's a community there.
Yeah.
But I think that we have nowhere near what we anticipated
I
happening.
know, but how have we changed in the actual numbers year to year? Has it increased or decreased?
So it's increased, though I have to say the last couple of years, virtually the same. I mean,
So it basically increased while it was increasing the occupancy of the building?
Correct,
Okay. And now it's fully rented out, so,
yeah. I mean,
virtually.
We're at, in the neighborhood of like 42 kids, something like that.
And that's spread among all
That's
K through
pre-K
12?
to
Yeah,
12. Yeah, pre-K.
And 3 elementary schools.
yeah. Is it Deerfield and Hanlon, or?
It's, so now we have students at Downey, Deerfield, and
Yep.
And then the other question I have is, did you talk about plans beyond, obviously, we've got one big plan beyond now, but like, things like, you know, you don't want to have this wish list. You know, are there any, like, what are the anticipated things coming up in the next year or two that are, you know,
Yeah, we
it's the old, you know, just because you didn't ask for it, doesn't mean the need is gone away.
No, and I think, you know, that's always been clear every year that there's more, and that's why I think I kind of emphasized the fact that I felt like the school department had done an excellent job of keeping the increase at a really reasonable amount. So I'm sure there are hundreds of other things that were asked for by the departments in the budget, but they really kept focused to what's our curriculum responsibilities, what are our state responsibilities, and how can we sort of manage what we have in the most creative way possible. So we didn't spend very much time, except for on the school building project, talking about what's happening, down the road. I do have to say, I feel like the teachers and the schools themselves are really focused on the schools and what's happening there, and the administration has been, splitting their time between looking at the building project and managing what's happening now, so.
Like looking at enrollment at the high school, now, I know now you've kind of hit all of the different departments at least once, so you're gonna have to be going back and looking at some of the other departments again.
We will, but I mean, the enrollment at the high school at this point has been growing.
Yeah.
But it's kind of reached the peak, and we're
Okay.
gonna be hanging out there at the peak for a couple of years, and then it's gonna start
Okay.
to decline. So I'm not anticipating any, significant.
More if you change add programs or something, okay.
Or if we decide to invest more on the special ed side.
Yeah, well, that's always a,
Yeah, and I
No.
think that's what we're seeing with the enrollment, and it was a pretty good discussion we had about where, for a while it was, you can hear all in the news about higher ed and enrollment decreasing because students are decreasing in high school, and yet ours are increasing, but they're not increasing very much, and they're gonna go down pretty soon, but then the elementary school is gonna come up on the back end, so it's just a crazy balancing act of, when people are having kids and moving into town, so. But they are on it. They're on it twice, MSBA and us.
yeah.
We have lots of information.
Good stuff, thank you. Any other questions on school? Yeah, it was really good, thank you, Jen and
And
Mike.
record time.
Well done.
Most importantly, record time, teacher's pet.
I am teachers.
And then this might,
I don't know, what's better for them? Am I okay here, or do you want me over there?
We can hear you.
well, it's more for the,
Whatever makes you happy.
Chris,
We're all set.
I'll address Chris on this. Okay, thank you. So, just to remind everybody why we even have this committee, it says on the agenda that Barbara and I are the liaisons to the Long-Range Planning Committee. There is a Long-Range Planning Committee that advises the Select Board, and we do attend that, and we are liaisons to that. But this committee is a little bit different than that. This committee is trying to take items that impact revenue and expense in a particular year and look at them in the broader context of multiple years, or maybe how they affect our balance sheet. So in balance sheet, we just mean the stuff we own, assets, and the things we owe, liabilities and debts. So we're looking at that, and obviously thinking about early warning systems. I'm going to talk not about anything to do with municipal and education from a annual budget perspective, but obviously things that Pete and Jen said impact those. For example, Jen talked about the changing needs for elementary schools. Obviously, the school building project is looming over everything that we're about to talk about. So what we'll talk about is today primarily capital, cash, and those will be the big topics. And then sort of priorities and policies to some degree. And what we'll say this year is it is unusual in the budget. Pete, I think, really previewed it well. And we'll talk about all that. One other thing Barb brought up that I thought was important is that some things that are in the budget this year could in fact be impacted by the overall policies that have been put forward in the OSRP. For example, some of the recreation or spending around athletic fields and all that could be impacted by the OSRP. And I thought we'd start by putting in last year's conclusions to this report, just so you can see. It was useful for me to go back and look at it, just to think about what a different world we were in March of 2018. So, the forks in the road, the immediate pressing fork that was sticking in our neck last year was, what are we going to do about the buildings we own in Islington? So that's resolved itself. I know there's a lot of work to be done, and the folks doing it don't think they've resolved itself. But from a budget and long-range perspective, those are less on our radar screen today. And then obviously one of the things we were thinking about last year is what about deferred CapEx at elementary schools that may or may not be affected by the school development project, and I think that goes to
Barb's last question to Jen, which is what are you doing about other stuff that may or may not, if you don't know the scope of the school project, you don't know what else you're deferring in creating a problem for later. Anyways, things from last year. And the conclusions were, gee, other than the fact that we were underspending our goal in capital, we were really on our policies last year. And I think in general, the conclusion was, and I would say it again, the town finances are in great shape due to careful, diligent, I'd say strategic leadership at both the select board, at the school department, and particularly in the staff. So all of that were our conclusions last year. And then there's a list of long-term capital projects. This on page 8 was stuff that was in the last year's report. The good news is some of those things have been addressed.
Mike, can you keep clicking?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you want me to do it, Mike?
No, you better not. You better not.
Mike wants to drive.
Somebody has to do it.
Yeah, this will slow me down.
It's like a TV.
Anyways, so for those of you who didn't follow that, don't worry, we didn't even start talking about this year yet. This year, things are different. So again, Islington is behind us from a budget perspective, but as you heard Pete say, and I think to some degree Jen say, this budget is really, I'll say to some degree for us, those of us who've been around for a while, radical when it comes to capital. We are increasing, and by the way, we look at capital as pay-as-you-go capital, sort of ordinary course municipal, school capital. There's another category called other capital, which is most likely municipal or school. And then in this year, we also have the large one-off road work, crosswalk and sidewalk project. So when you think about it, we're increasing capital for pay-as-you-go in the schools by 14.7% versus last year and 27% over a 5-year average. We're increasing the municipal capital 52.5% over last year, 60.8% over a 5-year average. The other capital, which is often a luxury or has been a luxury in this town to have any, is increasing nearly 90% over last year and 239% over the 5-year average. And then that doesn't include this exempt proposal for $4.9 million on roadworks. And we're going to look at that in a minute just to see how that sort of spreads out over the years, at least how it shows up in the budget books that way. So the overall goal for the town is to spend 3% on capital, 3% of the so-called general fund or the operating budget, which is about $100 million this year. So we blow by that this year. So last year, our only significant policy miss was we didn't spend enough on capital. This year, we're blowing that away. And that's without including the, I'll call it the override, but the exempt debt offering. We blow it away. I can tell you I've been in the FinCom for 9 years, and I had a 2-year period in between. So as long as I've been paying attention, we have been banging the table to spend more money on capital. We're even doing that today, sort of in the questions in other segments. So FinCom and others have been saying we're worried about kind of letting buildings such as the fire station #1 kind of dilapidate over time, and are we paying attention to it? This year, clearly, we are catching up on capital spending. I'm going to show you with some numbers a little bit later kind of what that looks like. However, George asked the question sort of, okay, that's great, but how are we paying for it and what are the impacts of that? So the other major conclusion in here is that we are spending money not from things like taxes, but we are spending money and depleting resources from what I would call balance sheet cash accounts. So in here, you'll see our hotel and meals tax, which was about $1.2 million at the end of last year. Sorry. If you would just keep doing that, Tom.
No problem.
Depletes down to 0. We're decreasing free cash to the level where our free cash will be below our policy level. So while we're above our policy level in capital, which is great, we're below our policy level on cash. And before people get upset about that, we'll come back and talk about that in a second as to why that may be okay. We did fail to allocate a single penny to the capital stabilization fund. So we do have a couple of rainy day accounts in town, which we'll come back to and talk about in a second, but we have the stabilization fund, which is we get hit by an asteroid and we need funds to fill the hole or whatever. That fund we're adding $125,000 to this year, and that's great. But we also have a capital stabilization fund, which is a separate account that we put money into to do capital projects beyond the budget. We've invested in that account a little bit here and there over the last couple of years. We're investing zero in it this year. What I say in the next bullet is I think this likely reflects confidence in the select board and school department and Pam and others and Mike about the stability and predictability of things like the meals and the hotel tax. And also a sense, and I'll show you some evidence of this later, that we will be regrowing our free cash. At least if things are in line with our historical experiences, we will be. And again, I mentioned here, the school project is kind of looming.
And they're also using the full tax levy.
And they're using the full tax levy, thank you, Barb.
It's little print.
I think I put that in here, but.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, okay. That was a great comment from Barb, thank you. And so just to simplify kind of the policy fork in the road this year, without any sort of editorial about right or wrong, there's two directions that we could have gone this year with the school project looming. First, we could load up on ordinary course capital projects in advance of that major school project, so we make sure that we don't fail to fund these things, or that we are distracted by a massive project and therefore don't attend to some of these things that in scale look a lot smaller. So that's one direction, and that is appear to be the direction we're going in. The other option could have been to preserve and hoard some of this cash and reduce the impact of a big project like the school project. You could have taken the money and put it into the capital stabilization fund and put it away to decrease the impact of the non-reimbursed part of the school project or something like that. So there's obviously shades of grade between those two options, but that's sort of the fork in the road that we faced this year. I'm going to quickly blow through this. This is just I'll say a quick snapshot of our, I'll say, key balance sheet accounts. And most notably here, I think, is to pay attention to free cash and reserve funds, the very top line. The other things are just there for you to look at. I think somebody made the point, I think Peter made the point, it's useful to kind of look through this stuff, maybe in advance of our voting on the capital budget items when we get there. But this here, this sort of minutely detailed page is a list of our cash, our certified free cash as of the end of last fiscal year, and then our various uses in this budget, in the proposed 2020 budget, which leaves us with an unallocated free cash balance of $2.166 million. To that, we also have $3.25 million in our stabilization fund, that asteroid hits you fund that I mentioned before. Meals tax, that is depleted to zero, but we are collecting 90-ish or more thousand a quarter, and by the time this comes around and we vote on this, we'll presumably have a couple more quarters in there. And then the capital stabilization fund remains at $1.5 million. And so in general, we have $7,061,000 in these various funds of cash, and last year we had nearly $9 million. So we've decreased that. If the budget is put in place, we've decreased all of that by about $1.8 million. Okay, so you might say, okay, George asked the question, how are we paying for all this capital? It's coming from, as Pete correctly pointed out, a depletion of free cash, at the moment below the policy level, and then a complete depletion of meals and hotel tax as of 12/31/18, which will also be replenished. And so that's kind of what this slide says. It says, here's where we are on free cash. I'll point out this, by the way, I steal from Pam all the time. Most of this, the thickness of this document is because I'm cutting and pasting things that are in various documents that Pam has given us during the course of the year, or that are on the website. But if you look at what Pam has budgeted for local receipts, for the last 3 years, she's budgeted slightly more than $4 million for local receipts. And if you look at the last actual year that she reported, fiscal 18, we had nearly 6.2 million actual collections. Most of that comes from better than budgeted auto excise taxes. This extra money will bounce into free cash in the following year. So it's one reason to not be completely concerned about the depletion of free cash, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna go by that. And again, meals and hotel tax, you'll see on this page. The last full year, we have $370 million in meals tax. I think that number will be better, but if you sort of divide that by 4, you're kind of at that 90 million a quarter, which is what we pegged. And then on top of that, hotel, we actually do better with hotel. We only get a sliver of meals, but we get all of hotel. Hotel's gonna start adding some real value too. So,
Is it $370 million?
Thousand.
thousand. Did I say million?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Budget problems over
We wouldn't be having this problem.
By the way, we should
discussion
talk about the obesity problem in town. It's out of hand.
Smoke coming out of my ears, that was really.
Tom, will you for now on just remind me when I'm using the wrong numbers as well?
I will, click, Mike, click.
Okay, so in addition to that, a new growth doesn't necessarily refill the bucket on free tax. But again, as I mentioned before, I think our Pam and her team are intentionally conservative in certain areas. One of them is excise tax. She doesn't want to be wrong because she can't overspend that number, so she's conservative intentionally, thankfully. And we should all appreciate that. And then also on new growth, you know, if you look at on page 20, you'll see the history of our actual new growth in what I'm calling traditional new growth, not University Station new growth. And she is budgeting at $450,000, and we usually beat that. And that just means that the following year, if that levy goes up, we collect that tax. It can be used for things like we're using it for in this budget cycle, which is additional bodies down at University Station within the municipal department, and I think there's also $50,000 in there for some busing for school kids. So new growth is conservatively budgeted. Some of that cash will come in, and it will be useful in helping to fund the budget, even though it doesn't sit in a free cash account. So again, I think we're depleting our cash to pay for additional capital. We're depleting the cash in a way that I think is generally replenishable. And as a result, I think we're accomplishing a broader goal of getting rid of some of these projects that might otherwise loom, especially in the context of a much bigger project. I am going to start going faster. But I'm not in this section. So capital spending. So again, Peter previewed this, and I mentioned it as well before, but just to give you a sense of it all, if you look at page 22, you can see our history since 2015 of capital spending, as well as our average, and then a comparison of what we're proposing to spend versus LY. And actually, if you go, where did I put it? Let me see it in the next page. If you look at this, this was the first capital budget that we saw from Pam. I can't remember when we saw it, but you'll see that initially, proposed 2020 was going to be sort of normalized capital. 886.9 for the schools and 867 for the municipal, and TBD for additional capital. And obviously, we've blown through that. We've increased the school budget, pay-as-you-go capital by $130,000. That doesn't include the HVAC stuff that you'll see later. For Thurston, we are bulking up the municipal budget from that original estimate by $455,000. And then you'll see the other capital spending on page 26, and this is in some detail. It's all been talked about. All the larger things have already been talked about before. The field lighting at Thurston, Jen gave the justifications for that. And also Peter and Todd talked about the Carby Street retaining wall, et cetera. And then the multi-body purpose truck Barb described in excruciating detail. So significant spending in there. To George's question, where's it coming from? It's sort of a mix of free cash, which has already been used, and also meals and hotel cap spending. And then the next one, we've all seen this. This is Todd's initiative, and I'm going to show you some spacing on this in a minute that's been in some of the other documents. Say anything but useful about that. The next page is sort of the history of where we get this stuff. As you know, generally speaking, in recent years, kind of since the recession and the stabilization after the recession, the town has done an absolutely remarkable job by building a fire station and a police station without going outside of 2.5, which is, you know, really, it's the reason we did University Station. It's the result of great management. But of course, we're back now talking about an exempt debt offering now with a very much bigger one coming down the pike. So we have to think about that. And that's really what pages 28 and 29 sort of show you the history of. This page is unreadable, even to me, with it right in front of me, but I'm going to go from memory on it. But it is worth pulling out your magnifying glass and studying a little bit. The table at the right, I pulled from the back of this book. This is the proposed overall budget, and there's a capital section in it. And I summarized it, and it's really remarkable because I think I said last year that capital spending in this town, just like at your own house, it's a game of whack-a-mole. You get 5 things done and you go, wow, that's great, and then the next year you get 5 new things. And then you wake up and you panic because it's actually 8. In every year when we look at this thing, the various town departments put in their wish list for capital, and there's always a bunch of stuff that we didn't get to. And it's always terrifying, frankly. This year, we're making a massive dent in that. At least we're hitting a lot of things that were in the fiscal year 2020 budget. And you can look at, I highlighted in yellow the things that are sort of covered by either the other capital or by, I keep calling it Todd's bill, but the road bill. And there you can see where Todd or Todd's team had sort of spread out the use of some of those funds. You'll see it's not all used this year. I thought it was $1 million, but it's $1,250,000. It looks like he has spread out over a handful of years hence. What we aren't doing in this budget is we are not doing anything with a couple of big things that have been requested. One is the community and rec center, which I think everybody has heard talked about it. It's not yet on our agenda, but it was raised by the OSRP as well. We're not doing anything specifically with the Morris and tennis courts. We are affecting the basketball court over there. And then there's been a lot of initiatives around the Sheehan, I'll say athletic complex, that have not been addressed but have been asked about. And then there's a few nickel and dime things too. I shouldn't say nickel and dime, they're important, but smaller dollar amount things that are not going to be addressed here too, and you can see those. And then also you can see in this, in what I wrote here, my summary of their summary, is you'll see that there are things out to the right that we have to worry about that are looming, and obviously school elementary project in 2022 is in here at $64 million. So that scares you to death. And then town hall is in here at 9,950. And then interestingly, George, you prompted it before, and I hadn't really put any thought into this, but in this, in the materials I looked at, $250,000 for Fire Station 1, and then $150 for next year. So there's no $10 million line item here, at least that I saw. So, but we all know what's out there. I mean, we don't know what the plans are, but it's not, there isn't, maybe Chief could talk about that, but I didn't see a line item 5 years out for a big expense, and it may be because we're sequencing things here, and maybe in general, the various committees had concluded that, that we will have to sequence that later, but we can think about that. But at the bottom, you'll see, and by the way, I'm leaving sewer out always because it's too complex for me.
Can't live without it then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad other people are doing that. But you'll see, you won't see because it's down at like 0.1 font, but, if you include all of Todd's stuff, again, no offense, Todd, then we're at $9.7 million of capital funding this year if that exempt debt proposal gets approved. And I'm taking $1,250,000 out of that because it's really in future years. I mean, we're talking about knocking off $8.5 million of capital expenses this year. It's a ton. And again, we're depleting some of our assets to do it. The reason I'm not up in arms about it is I think those are assets that we will be able to replenish, or that will naturally replenish themselves. The last section here, I'm really not going to go over this. This is just for reference. I'm not sure it matters, but one area that does matter is our debt and our capacity to borrow. Because some of us at this committee have said, could we have borrowed for the road work under Prop 2.5 again? And I guess I would just say, if we look at this that comes out of the audited financial statements, and this is fiscal 2018, if you're able to see that over in the far right-hand column, you'll see principal and interest payments we're making a year. And if you look at the year that we're in now, fiscal 2019, we're paying principal and interest of 6.1 million. And in a couple of years, we're at 5.4 million. So in theory, we may have had capacity to bring that in if we weren't also using some of the funding for other capital projects. So in theory, if those capital projects were frivolous, you might conclude that we should not do the road work with an exempt debt offering. We should do it within 2.5. But again, I think if you did that, you'd be sacrificing other capital projects, which you could argue about them one by one, but I don't think anybody would think of them as frivolous. And then lastly, I'm not going to do this topic justice, but as we think about our liabilities, Pete brought up OPEB and talked about that. Another debt-like another debt-like thing is this pension liability for us. We're paying $5.4 million in our next budget for just kind of pension stuff, and 70% of that is making up for a shortfall. So we not only have OPEB, we have pension shortfall we're making up on, just liabilities the past we're contributing to. It's an awful lot of money. It'd be nice to not have that, but that, unlike OPEB, I don't know when this is going away. So that was fairly short.
That was great. Thanks, Mike.
I now know why you were an investment banker. No, it's actually very, very good. I just want to have a comment. I guess, from my perspective, I don't know what our role is in saying to the town what you should fund and what you shouldn't fund. I don't want to get into that, but I want to share a philosophical observation. I am nervous about thinking that the economy is going to continue to roll along happily. I think as you recall, I said about a year ago, watch out for this tax bill. I thought it was going to have a major impact. And I think if you look at any of the forecasts, that we are at a peak. And at some point in time, it's either going to level or start to go down. So I'm not as optimistic about growth going forward. The second thing is we sort of had a philosophy of conservatism, in my opinion, as we were looking at University Station, as we started to get the benefits of the meals tax and starting to fund reserves. I get very uncomfortable with us, depleting these reserves. What I think it does is it takes away flexibility. For example, I think Todd has put on the table some very, very important road projects. If the override, let's assume it doesn't go through, well, we have used up all of our reserves that we could have used to fund part of that. And so I get very nervous over, in 1 year, depleting, especially the meals tax, and going below where I think we should be on our capital stabilization, not putting any money into capital stabilization, and going below some of our criteria. So I think we as a FinCom have got to step back and say, philosophically, what are we comfortable with? I don't know to what extent we go into and we say to the selectmen, we think you should fund this versus fund that. That's sort of beyond my expertise. But I am uncomfortable with this approach we're taking because it's so contrary to the way we've approached things in the past. It's like our DNA has been sort of treasuring some of these resources so that we have the flexibility. And I think it is nice to catch up with some of this capital, but the way I think we're doing it, we're giving up a lot of flexibility. And that probably concerns me more than anything else.
I have to agree with George. I was very surprised by this budget. I think the only way at this point, we will have articles in front of us, and it's how we vote on those articles is how we send the message out. I feel that we've got some assets that we aren't, like the fire station, that we have to take care of. And, we've got, when we redid the high school, I remember we hadn't spent money on the pool. Now they've done the HVAC, but I know there are other issues with the pool that we have to take care of. We did take care of one of the field surfaces. I look at the lights, and I'm like, we're just adding that. At least when we put the lights on at the high school, they were donated, and $700,000. And to be honest, on that one, like long-range planning, there's no obligation for them to come to us on that. It was on the agenda a few times, but we've never seen any justification for it. That comment you made today, Cindy, was the first time I heard that it was because there's going to be disruption. We went through major disruption when the high school was built, and we made it through, and we had a really crappy Deerfield field, and we didn't have fields then either. We did make it. And we've had like vast analysis on when we put in lights on the tennis courts, like, you know, how many hours that was going to add to it. And, you know, the only thing I've seen is, well, that field gets very wet and you can't use it for half the spring. So I just think it's like they've got money and we've got to throw it places. And I just feel like we should be saving it. We've got the big school project. We've got some other big things coming up. The high school, the fire station repair. You know, if people didn't like the size of it, we could be taking care of the sidewalks for $500. The sidewalks throughout town for $500, $500,000 instead of $700,000 for lights that just deal with one very fair, you know, one specific group. And I'm really concerned because it's like, okay, we're going to spend all of this. Usually we recommend that they put 20% into the capital stabilization and build it up. And it's rare that we have an opportunity to build up a lot of money. And that's one thing. We've already built up a lot. We can keep on building. And I'm not comfortable. It just seems like a whole different budget than normal. And also, and I don't know if it was this year or last year, but you know, Pam is very conservative in how she sets those things like excise tax. And a lot of those were bumped up. And I think it was last year. And, you know, it was still well within what we could do. But, you know, we've done that, but now it's like we've kind of gone, I don't know, on steroids. I'm just not comfortable. And I'm not sure what to do about it, but.
Well, from the other side of the table, how much is enough? I mean, we had almost $9 million in free cash at the end of last year. We're planning to spend down to 5. Should we not spend anything until we get to 10 million and then spend it?
Well, we could save it in capital stabilization because the whole point of that was to kind of, you know, collect, instead of like the pay-as-you-go, we kind of add money in, and then we can, things that maybe would have required a bond, and I don't know how much room we have.
But that's exactly what we're doing. You know, how much, let's spend down to 5 million. Let's put all of Todd's roads and take it out from free cash and spend free cash down to 3 million. Isn't that enough? And I agree with George that the economy in general is probably going to drop off. But it's kind of like my checking account. It looks better when the balance, when the statement comes in and I have more than I had last month. But how much is enough? Because you can let it grow.
It seems to me, I had the feeling when I read this budget, to equate it to your own life, I kind of thought, I felt like the kids had won and were going to Disney World instead of saving for college.
Well, okay, all right, that's a good point, but what are we spending it on? It's not frivolous stuff.
Let me give you another example. In my opinion, we have 2 big capital projects that we have to fund. Number one, the schools. Now, Ann's just a butts about it. Let me assume that's a $60+ million project, maybe 70 million. My guess is the fire station, which I think is critical, is probably 15 plus or minus million. If you took the amount of money we're getting in free cash, in the meals tax of about $400,000 a year now, and you said we're going to use that $400,000 to help fund some of the debt service we're going to incur, I might say, gee, that's a much better use of that money over the next 20 years, you know, to maybe reduce by $400,000 the amount of debt service. It can fund a lot of debt service. That's what I don't see here. What I see here is there's some things we'd like to do. Maybe somebody has a preference, they get it in here. What I don't see is us stepping back and saying, what's the strategic plan for using free cash, for using the meals and hotels tax, which is a home run for us as far as I'm concerned, to building up our essential reserves. And that, I don't see a philosophical approach that says within that, here's how we want to spend the money. That's probably the most concerning thing to me, because I'm nervous about, I don't think this fire station can last. I really, really don't. And I think, we may wake up one day and we're all of a sudden told, you can't use it anymore. Well, that's going to be a lot of fun in terms of what that'll cost the town. I want to see us planning for a project that probably's got to get off the ground in the next 2 to 3 years, even if we started planning for it today. And I'd rather see us setting funds aside to start to fund some of that long-term capital requirements. And that's what I don't see in this bit of a wish list. I think it's beyond my skill set to say to the selectmen, do the lights or don't do the lights, or do the pool or don't do the pool. I just don't have enough. But what I don't see is a philosophical approach to this. That's what bothers me.
Well, I'll tell you, we had, at long-range planning, there was a list of things that were gonna wait, and like the lights were on them, so they were never discussed, because they're always, like the open space plan, it's like, they want to address a lot of different things. And that was the purpose for doing the plan, but now they've kind of jumped the gun, and now they're gonna spend, probably one of their largest amounts on something that not necessarily looking at that plan would be, would be what they want to do. It's
That's
just,
a good point, because I think the open space really throws me for,
a loop.
on top of your comments about the priorities, and then we have an article that I'm still not sure FinCom's endorsement means what. Because there's capital, there's community center, projected for 22 potentially. Town hall improvements, that wouldn't be in it, but it's hard for me to understand what's in that article and what potential funding commitments do we have that may or may not be included in the capital projections that are here. I know each department does a phenomenal job, from the pool to the library to, tracking their own, the school, but this is kind of above and beyond, and it's hard to understand what direction we're going.
Wanted to mention one thing. So I can appreciate George and Barb's take on the, what seems to be not quite as conservative an approach to the budget as in prior years. And I don't know, the way I look at, or the way I see it is that I think it's the conservative approach of the last number of years that has allowed this opportunity to, afford the town to spend some money. And 1.2 million in the meals tax fund is, again, I think a result of being conservative with that. Pam's approach to local receipts being very, it's almost like a sandbag approach. It's very, very conservative. Again, that allows, again, for a nice boon to free cash as well. So I think that the conservative approach by the town over the last number of years has put the town in a good, solid position. And certainly, no one really knows. Everyone can speculate on what the economy has in store in the next few years and all. But I think that there's probably enough of a track record in terms of meals, tax, and probably hotel in the future to sort of get to be able to project that out and feel pretty good about it.
But I think if you showed me a 15-year or 20-year projection on debt service that built in an estimate for the school, the 60+ million for the school, built in 15 million for the fire station, built in whatever your other priorities are, if it's town hall or rec center, whatever you want to do, and said to me, here's the stream of debt service requirements, and showed me how we as a town are going to approach that. It may require an override, it may be some stuff we can do within. I feel a heck of a lot better spending current assets today if I know how it fits in. Where I get very uncomfortable is spending the money the way we are today without me understanding the big picture. And it's a scary big picture because, the schools, we know we have to do it.
That's
And I
supposed
think
to be in the comprehensive plan, right?
Right,
That Nora's
if
working
you
on.
said to me,
Right.
look, we
I agree.
understand, by the way, I think we owe this answer to the citizens. Here's the requirements over the next 20 years. There are 4 or 5 big capital items the town is gonna have to take care of. We know how to do it, okay? Within that allows us to feel very comfortable over the next 3 to 5 years on a short-term basis of using free cash or using meals tax to take care of some of these items. But I would find it very hard to support a capital budget unless I saw that bigger picture. That's the only point I'm trying to make. If you can show me how we can do it, you then spend the money what you want to spend it on, but show me that it fits within our financial needs, okay? And we haven't been overly conservative, we haven't been tight. I think what we've been is prudent in the way we've positioned the town, look what we've done with OPEB. I mean, we've solved some major, major issues. We're putting over $1 million a year into that, which is a phenomenal accomplishment to the town. I just don't want to see us give up that philosophical approach in terms of how we have managed this budget. And I think at town meeting, you always hear people say, you know, what is it going to cost? How are we going to fund this? And I think I'd rather be upfront and say, you know, folks, guess what? In 5 years, we got an override coming down. You want a good school, here's what you're going to have to do. And this fits within it.
I don't know if it's this side of the room, but
All the old
I can't
people.
predict the economy, but I can know with certainty that tax law change, and that tax law change is affecting everyone. And to the extent that we're going outside 2.5 for something, even though they've said it's only $80 a household, there's that 10K limitation on state and local taxes, and that's affecting everyone. And the more we increase and the more we spend, that's going to be an impact. So I think that has to be thought of. And George has mentioned this in the past. The other thing that I would say is when Pam always starts her budget presentation, it's always with the scales. We have a balanced approach to everything. And to me, when I look at this budget, it doesn't look like that balanced approach that it has been in the past. It looks way heavily weighted towards capital. And so I can't give exacts, but I'm just uncomfortable with it as you two are, just uncomfortable with it. So.
We don't, Mike, I'll ask you, not that you'd be the person, but do we have any expected tax revenue that we haven't had? Like, are there any developments or anything happening that we would?
I mean,
There's
it would generate
Right.
incremental new
Yeah.
growth. I mean, I think there'll be new growth above the.
But nothing significant?
Not that I know
Not
of.
rate coming up. I mean, down the road, whatever
Correct.
goes into the lodge.
Right, I
because
didn't
that's
think
been-
so, but,
That's been, no?
go ahead, yes, please.
I don't know if I'll be heard, but the discussion we had about the tax increment financing and the Citizens Bank building, if they go in as planned, that will be a nice boost to new revenue growth. I just want to highlight that.
Sure, and what was the year, though? I thought
But
year
not,
one was.
not in
4.
FY '20.
Well, so if we do it with a tax increment financing, the first 2-3 years are not generating much revenue for the town, starting in year 4, proceeding through year 15, it eventually gets to 100% of the revenue comes to the town. So the tax break is higher in the initial years and declines. So I just don't want you to lose sight of that.
No, that's
as-
fair.
as a-
I was thinking nearer
Yeah.
term. So
Not-
that's really.
Well, you also have the
Next term, we'll talk
condominiums.
about a potential school building project.
You have the, you also have,
What year is year 4?
Number of what you're expecting that revenue to be? And is it
Well, I know there was a
$100,000?
discussion last week, and I think you were supposed to all get that. Did you receive the?
We have not,
No.
no. But year 4 is what year, calendar year, Nancy? Sorry, I'm not doing the math that
Fiscal year.
quickly. Or fiscal year,
Well,
either way.
if So we need approval at town meeting to have
Yeah.
authorization to do this. They're already in their planning stages, design of whatever, this is an active project for citizens. Building, I don't know, I guess we'd be talking about the end of 2020 for a building, so that's FY '21.
I thought, yeah, the
Start date was July 1st of
Right.
2020,
right.
and year one was the 95%.
What are you saying start date, though? The occupancy?
Building.
Yeah.
But that was the
First year.
occupancy of the new building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next July?
well, you also
July
have
of 2020 is the start date of the TIF.
you have you also have the condos coming in, because those are, I'm not sure what their expected completion date is. They're still working on the outside. You have the condos, you've got Westwood Lodge, and I don't know what the anticipated date is for Islington.
But see, if I were doing the projection, and, you know, I would say, look, here's, and I would sensitize it, you know, you do ups and downs, but I would say, this is the revenue growth, these are the capital requirements, this is most likely when the override's gonna have to take place, here's how we fund it. That's what we're not looking at right now.
I agree.
And from a financial, from my old budget director days, that's the way I would look at something. You know, I wanna make sure in my own mind, if I'm recommending it, people vote for it, that I've taken a look at that broader picture.
Model it out.
And to some extent, maybe that will help people start to understand that, you know, at the end of the day, we've got to get ourselves ready to get this override through the schools. And I'd rather start talking about it now than waiting for, you know, 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, and say to people, look, this is something we know we have to do, and we can do it. You know?
But we're almost late in a way, because design will start happening, and the first questions people will start asking is, what will it cost, and how will we fund it? You know, that will start this year, I think.
To add to what George is saying, I think we have to educate the people, because there are only so many times we can go back and ask for an override before they're gonna say, forget it. And we may get the roads and maybe the school, but we won't get the fire department or the town hall. So
Yeah.
we've got to let them know what they're in for.
I feel like there's a looming sense that university, like, what have we gotten from University Station? You know, what,
Fire
I think
depa-
people
yeah.
thought it would pay for everything almost, not that
Well, I
it
think
should have.
people all
but-
thought their taxes would go down.
Correct.
No,
Correct,
We're still fighting that attitude.
yeah.
correct. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much, Mike and Barb. This was really helpful. I think the fork in the road is a good point. because it is-
I just ask, I mean, I
Yeah,
really
go ahead.
respect my, I mean, what are your thoughts on it? You've listed this very astute financially. Are we raising the right issue? Are we not raising the right issues?
No, George, I think I've said it for the last 5 years at least, that I agree with you on the budget 100%. On forecasting out 20 years, I agree that our capital projects should be spelled out. I agree that our financial, they're going to change. I think it's difficult to put a public document out there that looks that far out. People begin to expect things, and if things change, you get, there's political issues with doing that. But I hope and expect that probably Pam has something like that that's well thought out. I assume that. I think, I kind of agree with Jim as well. I think that if it were up to me, there's 500,000 or 600,000 or maybe less than that we're going to spend annually on these roads. If we could have done that in 2.5, I think it would have eliminated what I think will feel like kind of override fatigue if we start doing this over and over again. But I also think, I agree with Tom's point that, you know, we should look at our free cash policy. So you made the comment about having all this free cash. Well, remember, some of it's that asteroid fund, that we shouldn't touch.
Right.
Regular free cash, there's no policies as to what we're supposed to use it for, other than we're supposed to use it for one-off things, non-operating budget, things that happen over and over. So I think in this particular year, using it for some of this catch-up capital, especially when we think it's going to come back, in the absence of multiple other capital projects, it'd be crazy to not do it, because as I said, I don't think there's anything frivolous in there. So the issue would be, you know, we think we're going to be caught up in free cash. We think we're going to have an okay continuous flow of meals and tax fund. That's all good. But if we didn't think we had a $60 million school project, a $15 million fire station, a $10 million town hall, you know, you would have no problem with what's happening this year. In fact, you'd go back to FinCom's five groups ago who'd be cheering you on for doing it. So the issue is really the mystery of the future. So I go back to your point, George. I do agree that whether it's Pam directly or even if we do something unofficially, we should have some projections we could start to think about where it goes in. Because I do not think that I would be happy as a citizen to see my taxes go through the roof because of 4 exempt debt offerings in the next 10 years. That would really, really bother me.
So we got something like that for University Station, but it was kind of easy to project out the tax revenue. I know she hesitates on projecting out the tax revenue because it's all the different parts, and, you know, she doesn't want to be held to it, and so I know that's part of her hesitation. You know, she wants to deal with real numbers that are recurring now. But yeah,
Yeah,
the problem is
no
we come in-
projection's perfect.
The problem is we come into talking about this after all of these are put in place. So we just have to vote on them.
Any other questions?
Can I go off on a tangent?
No.
Put those pages
No,
here.
We can go off on a sea can.
There you go. Cosine. On the OPEB, I know we're supposed to fund it by a certain time frame. Is there a penalty if we don't meet that funding?
I don't think so. I don't think there is a penalty. I would be very hesitant to get off of the plan that we're on right now.
Wouldn't
We
the-
could ask Pam
Isn't the
about that.
penalty more that it affects your bond rating if, when they go in and look at your financials and you haven't met that requirement that's?
The reality is you'll only need 100% of the funding is if the town closes up and we had to pay everyone off the benefits.
I think there's more to
But
it than
I
that, though.
felt like at one point there was talk, though, about the state requiring you to fund OPEB at one
Threshold.
point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Right, and the state had a time frame.
Yeah, and I think that's the time frame we're on.
I think it goes down to your credit rating. It would be severely affected.
Julie, can I just say
So
one
it is a
thing?
penalty because
Yeah.
you,
I just want to compliment the folks who put the subcommittee reports together. I know
Right.
there's some new members, and I would just compliment the work that people did. I know how much work goes into this.
It's a ton of work.
Thank you.
It really
And,
is.
I think the new members are now official veterans.
George, you're still doing write-ups.
I'm already working on it.
No, I was gonna say the same thing. It takes a lot of, both the town department heads' time as well as your time to meet outside of work and family and other commitments, so thank you. What's distilled in 2 hours' worth of information is actually days of meetings and reports and things like that, so thank you. It's a huge amount of time and a lot of information. So with that, we'll move to, unless there's any questions from public, sorry. Okay, we'll move to, do we have to do a roll call before we close? Okay, because we lost Howard. So we are, planning board's meeting now, we should get from them updated information and
Tomorrow,
articles.
As soon as I have it, I'll.
By
do it.
close of business Thursday, I think is what we
When we
agreed
get that,
to.
you'll distribute that to us?
That's right.
Yes, I will, as soon
one
as I have
thing,
it.
I don't know if we specifically asked for it, but can we get clarification about what our vote is or what is needed for the OSRP?
Okay.
Yeah, we have.
Yes.
As Nicole reads, but yeah.
That is an outstanding question.
Yeah, okay.
Because I still honestly don't understand what our vote
Yeah, if
endorses
it's just a
there.
selectman that
I didn't
really-
read the 100-page.
I read it, but it's like, there must be something, there's something that says it has to be approved, but is it just the selectman that can approve it? Or what?
Yeah.
Selectmen and
They
planning.
want the town to
But yeah,
adopt
but-
it for some reason.
Yeah, and what is
Something
that?
to do with grants, but I'd like to see a list of.
Yeah,
what are those?
adopting is like,
Yeah,
what?
what does that mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I'm hoping there's updated article language or it's
So
withdrawn.
March 25th, we are, is there a public hearing, are we
Can
starting
we
to
talk about
vote?
the timeline? Is
Yep.
everybody ready
Voting?
to talk about timeline?
Yep.
Okay, so,
Yeah, we'll go back to that.
They should.
So for the reports,
so so our timeline is, the subcommittee reports are gonna be due on the 20th. I think I sent you guys an email that today. The appendices are gonna be due on the 27th. So the final meeting is the Monday, the 25th, with the second day would be the 26th. And so just keep in mind, there's voting.
the first two, are you talking about the book?
Yeah, the book.
Compiling the
Yes,
book.
what's the
yes.
appendices?
So, those are all the, you don't have to worry about that. But most important for new people to know that, depending on how Julie wants to manage the meeting on the 25th, we may do some voting on the 25th, and then if we need to roll over to the 26th, we'll vote then too. So just so you have an idea on that.
Will you repeat the date for what appendices and just?
Yes, the subcommittee reports are due on the 20th, which I sent you an email on today for anyone who's gonna write those. And then the appendices are due on the 27th. And the final hearings will be on the 25th and the 26th, where depending on, we know we're gonna have all the financial articles on, that we haven't had yet. And then depending on what happens with the planning board articles, we have at least 2 and maybe 3 that would come before or not. And then the select board can still, street acceptance is still, there's, as far as the last meeting, there was nothing yet, so we're still a little fluid on the articles. But the most important thing is, once we have the votes are in, the write-up, so the 26th would be the last day for us, we close the public hearing that night, the 26th would be the max, and then those write-ups for everybody are gonna be due to me on the 28th. So,
So that should be mostly the Community and Economic Development Subcommittee, understanding that the articles have been divided mostly in Jim's team, for the article pieces, by design, so that the school and the municipal, your work is heavy there.
Yes,
So hopefully that redistributes it a bit.
yes, that's right. So-
Okay.
And then, because it becomes a very fast turnaround for Julie to look at everything, and then
Right.
I have an obligation to get the book in the hands of the residents before town meeting.
I guess, having heard some of the discussion on the capital budget tonight, is there any, are we just gonna leave it until we take our vote on the eve of the 25th? Or is there some feedback we wanna give so that, I'm not sure what the vote's gonna come out. If you were to, I don't know what the vote's gonna come out in this capital budget today. So my concern is there some communication from us back to the selectmen, or we just leave it as is, or what?
That's a good question. Nancy was here, Mike had
Nancy
left.
is here.
Nancy is still here.
So when I spoke to Pam at the beginning of the week, what day was it? Or maybe it was
It's only
Friday.
Tuesday.
So she said, after you finish tonight with the subcommittee report, anything that is on your mind now, send her questions now.
She'll be presenting that night.
She's the one who's going to present that night, and so
But that's
everything
more
should go.
questions,
Right.
just if you have
Well,
not even a question, I
I
mean,
think
like,
anything on your mind, questions, concerns.
But we
Clarification.
raised some very large philosophical issues in terms of how you approach this capital budget, given the fact that we'd sort of like to know how the town is gonna deal with the known big items that are coming down the road right now. And somehow we need to give her a heads up, so she can talk with the selectmen or with Mike. I don't want that, because otherwise we're gonna end up in a funny position. My own personal feeling is on March 25th, I'm voting on this capital budget. At least give them the opportunity to come back and say, well, that's what it is, take it or leave it.
they kind of already did when she presented it the last time, and we kind of went through all that, and she goes, this is what it is.
Well-
I mean, there wasn't any,
So are you looking for really kind of philosophically, where's select board on this? And why are we making all these investments this year?
I would
In
go
lieu of
back-
not having that plan
I
that we
guess
want.
if I were a town meeting member, and I were to get up and I
Yeah.
said, because it keeps on coming up, okay, look, I'm aware of the schools, a lot of good education going out, I think the school department's doing a great job. I think there may be a couple of other issues. How does this fit into your overall plan? And we basically hem and haw, we don't answer it. And I think to Peter's point, I don't know those of you who have done your taxes, but it's a shocker this year in the high, in the SALT states, that where you no longer take significant deductions. So bottom line is and I think, as I recall, half the households in this state are over $10,000 in property taxes in Westwood. That's what Pam told us last time, which means every dollar increase, there's no 1/3 write-off, or there's no tax benefit to it. So I think people are gonna start to take a very, very hard, difficult look at this stuff. And which I've been saying for the last 2 years, but I guess I would at least like to have the Pam or the selectmen to at least be aware of the fact that certain concerns were expressed. If the select folks or people, whatever it's supposed to call them, come back and say, it is what it is, okay. But I'd hate to say it to you, I wish you had told us there were some concerns.
We can connect, I'll connect with Chairman Walsh.
Okay.
And kind of, this is on tape, but we can share that and see if he wants to speak before Pam. Kind of address that. I don't think we're gonna have a plan, obviously.
No, but
laid
I
out,
just-
But I think some of,
no, we're gonna have a warrant article, and I think that's where we have to
That's
vote
right.
for it.
That's what I
They
think
weren't
we'll-
really asking our input,
Correct.
we have to give our opinion,
correct. Yep.
and they have to deal with the results.
Okay, so do we have minutes or anything we have to, old business, new business, all set? So with that, I'll ask for.
And the
a mo-
next meeting is at 7, right?
It is
Yeah,
at
so back to
7
7.
here.
I'll send you
Yeah,
lots of
public
minutes.
hearing, yeah.
Right, so you will get the planning board information by Thursday. If not, then I don't know that we're gonna be able to make decisions. We've asked for that in lieu, based on the questions. And the way we left our last meeting is, in order for us to have the information we need to digest it and process it, we agreed to get that by Thursday, close of business. Correct. So that gives us, we obviously don't deliberate offline, but we can all intake the information and share questions back through Jane if we have them, to prep for it. And that's the best we're gonna be able to do,
Okay.
unfortunately. But
Nice job, though, really, very, very well done.
For anybody who's writing, if you, any examples that you want, I can provide lots of examples from prior articles, just to give you guidelines and stuff, so feel free to let me know. Yeah.
No meeting tomorrow.
no meeting tomorrow.
No.
No.
And then girls hockey's down right now, 2-0.
Oh,
They were our last hope.
Well, it's not over, it's only still in the third period, but it's bad news.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion